Okay, so we got to last time. Last time we got up to, we were discussing still the elements of piety, and the last thing we discussed was that piety is derived through chesed, through acts of gemilut chasadim. And if you recall, the last thing we said that you've got charity on the one hand, and you've got gemilut chasadim on the other hand. Gemilut chasadim is acts of loving kindness. And we said that in three aspects, Gimlut Chasadim, so general acts of loving kindness, is greater than charity in three ways. You want to remember them? So one is charity is only in respect of money, right? Whereas Gemilut Chasadim can be performed with one's physical being. You know, you're doing something for someone else. Charity can only be given to the poor, to people in need. Whereas Gemilut Chasadim, kindness, can be extended to anyone, rich or poor. And the third one is charity can only be given to the living, right? There's no concept of giving tzedakah to someone who's dead, but there is a concept of like chesed to the deceased. I mean, even how you prepare the body for burial, how you bury and accompany the deceased to the grave, that's chesed, right? Lavat hamet, accompanying the deceased, is a truest act of chesed, because you know you're never going to be paid back for that, right? The deceased can never pay you back for that. Okay, then we got to say, I don't think we've gone into this one, but it's a beautiful concept. And he says that whoever performs acts of kindness for others, Hashem does similarly for us. And he brings it from Pasuk in Devarim. It says, V'nastan lacha rachamim v'richamcha, which literally means that he may grant you mercy and be merciful to you. And what the Gemara in Shabbos learns out, sounds better in the Hebrews, Kol hamarachem ala briot, whoever is merciful on the creatures, marachim alav min hashamayim. Hashem, quid pro quo, is merciful on that person. So it's a midah keneged midah type of thing, a measure for measure. How we act towards other people, Hashem going to act towards us. And it goes more than just doing acts of loving kindness. So it also goes to overlooking other people's faults, right? Or being so exacting on someone else. We expect someone else to be perfect. We don't expect anyone to ever make a mistake. And we're harsh with other people, and we're judgmental with other people. And what the Gemara and what's learned out from that same statement is that if we can make concessions for others, if we can be kind and forgiving to others, well, that in that very same way, Hashem is going to judge us as well. So it's a midah keneged midah. When we talk about like a reward and punishment, it's not that Hashem says, should I reward or should I punish? It's almost as though it's already built into the fabric. It's built into the spirituality of reward and punishment. In other words, Hashem, we know, is from one aspect, the midah of din, the measure of judgment. You know, something's got to be correct. In other words, there's got to be exactly that, measure for measure. You being kind to others, you being forgiving of others, Hashem's going to judge you in the same light. However, God forbid, if we're not going to treat others well, if we're going to be very exacting on others, well, unfortunately, Hashem's going to treat us in the same way. And in fact, David HaMelech, author quotes over here from Tehillim, where David HaMelech says, do not enter judgment with your servant. He's referring to himself. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for no living being can find justification before you. In other words, what the David HaMelech, one of the greats, is saying is, Hashem, I know that if you have to judge me according to the measure of din, it's very difficult for me to escape your punishment. How do we, in a way, escape the punishment or the severe harshness that's due to us? Is by making sure that we treat others kindly, that we judge other people favorably. Because Hashem is always going to do unto us what we do, how we treat others. Sorry, it's all bunched around here, but it's just getting close to be able to plug in. Okay, just going on to another idea is that the virtue of piety, and this is very interesting as well. He says, isn't only in the realm of human beings, but remember, he actually doesn't go refer back to it. But what I said before is kol hamarachim ala briot, whoever is merciful on the creatures. Briot are creatures. Right? Hashem bara, Hashem creates. What does it create? Briot, creatures. So the author goes even further. He says it doesn't only apply to humans, but one should also not cause any harm to any creature, even animals, and to show mercy and compassion towards them. And he quotes from Mishlei, written by Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. A verse in Mishlei says, the righteous man knows the soul of his beast. It's beautiful. Anyone who loves animals, and I know there are a few in this room, it speaks beautifully to that a righteous person is able to know the soul of an animal as well, or that the animal needs kindness. Maybe the animal needs greater kindness because the animal can't fend for itself. And we know the whole concept of not causing pain and suffering to animals is a Torah law, is a Torah prohibition, not to cause pain to animals, not to cause distress. Just one that comes to mind. You don't plow together one strong animal and one weak animal. Why? Because the strong animal is going to yank, going to pull the weaker animal, cause distress. You don't, one other one, you don't muzzle an animal when it's threshing. Because again, it's there with the food. It's such, I don't know what the word is, cruelty. The animal can see the food there. It's busy with the food, and you don't let it eat anything. You're not allowed to do that. So again, he brings into piety. Don't think that piety begins and ends with humans, with man. No, it extends to the animal world as well. Okay, so that's the first aspect that he was speaking about. He was speaking about, remember, he said there were different aspects. The first aspect was between us and Hashem in piety, and the other one was between us and our fellow in piety. Now he goes on to discuss the second component related to this element of piety, midat hachasidut. Remember that word, chasidut, and that concerns its application. Okay. And he goes on to say that in the application of piety, even there we have two different principles, and each of the two principles has many different elements as well. So they said the two leading principles, and again, obviously we see this in so many of the other chapters that we've already covered, are fear and love of Hashem, right? Yira, fear, ahava, love of Hashem. And he says these are the two pillars of true divine service, without which piety could never establish itself. Okay, a lot of it is what, like I said, fear and love of Hashem are also the pillars of so many of the other traits that we learned about. He says fear of Hashem includes submissiveness before Hashem, the reverence felt as one approaches the service of Hashem, and the honor accorded to his mitzvahs. In other words, we don't just perform a mitzvah, we perform a mitzvah because we realize where it's coming from. It's coming from Melech Malchei Amlachim. It's coming from the King of Kings. It's not just a master or a boss who gives instructions to his employee. No, we have to understand where it's coming from. The love of Hashem comprises the joy cleaving to him, the zealousness, the alacrity that we spoke about previously, performing Hashem's mitzvahs. Now he's going to go on and elaborate one by one. He says the principal aspect of fearing Hashem is awe of his exaltedness. You know, just how great Hashem is. He said one must realize while praying, just as I've said now, so I've said it outside, he's saying it inside now. While praying or performing a mitzvah, that he's doing so before the King of Kings. We say it, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but on the Modim board that we have in Shul, right, the Modim D'Rabbanan, on the top, on the outer border, there's an acronym, and that acronym reads out Shiviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid. Understanding that Hashem dwells in front of us. Hashem is always in front of us, no matter where we are, what we do. Da lifnei mi ata omed. It's also written that you need to know in front of whom are you standing. It's obviously Hashem. Of course, that applies so much in prayer, but what the author's saying, it applies so much in life in general. And a mitzvah, know that when you're doing a mitzvah, why are you doing it? Why are you performing it? Who gave you that? You just quotes over here, the author of the Gemara, of a Mishnah in Brachot, and when you pray, know before whom you are praying, like I've just said. As I said, in order to attain this type of fear, there are three things that a person must hold in view and contemplate carefully. Okay, so in other words, to have fear of Hashem, what do you need? You have to be holding juggling these three balls at the same time. The first is, and we've said it, that the realization that his person is literally standing before the Creator. I mean, just outside, if you just think about that, not only to the issue of piety, but just in general, can you imagine if you pictured God in front of you all the time? We wouldn't do half the things that we did, right? It's quite funny. We know that Hashem is in front of us, but just because we don't see him, we don't have that immediate realization, that immediate knowledge. What the author is saying to us, we have to be able to visualize it and realize that, even though he's not visible to us. And he said this is the most difficult to do. Why? Because it's very hard. It's very hard to conceptualize. It's very hard to visualize. If you see your boss in the room, well, you're going to behave because there's your boss. You can see your boss. We have a concept. We have an idea. It's what I'm looking for. Abstract. Maybe that's a concept. It's abstract that there's Hashem everywhere. Concrete is difficult to concretize that because we don't see Hashem. So after he's established this in his mind, right, that I'm always in front of Hashem, Hashem's here, even though I can't see him, he must probe the exaltedness of Hashem. What does it mean? That he is above and beyond, even though, yes, we praise Hashem and we say brachot, he's above all of that. And all forms of perfection, above all forms of perfection that one could possibly imagine or contemplate. And with that, and this is what, or hand in hand with this, the author is going to say that with that exaltedness and the greatness of Hashem, which we can never comprehend and we can never fully praise, because by the fact that Hashem is infinite, by defining something or by praising something, that in itself is limiting it, right? But just by giving it that brocha, it's limiting. And Hashem is limitless. Hashem is infinite. So you can never give enough praise. Hand in hand, we have to look at ourselves as humble. We have to be humble. In other words, how small are we in comparison to Hashem? And after contemplating these things, right, how great is Hashem? Hashem is in front of us all the time. How small are we in comparison to Hashem? He says, once we have all of that, it will not be possible for someone to fear and tremble while speaking before Hashem, while mentioning his name and attempting to find favor before him. So in other words, everything that we're doing in life, right, we have to have that in our mind. If we go back to the earlier chapters, remember we said one has to try and monitor oneself. There's an objective right, there's objective wrong. And where am I at the moment? I'm on the side of right, on the side of wrong, and be able to pause and press the pause button on life at various intervals during the day and just say, where exactly am I? Similarly, I think what he's saying over here is we need to be able to many times during the day also remind ourselves. Maybe it's on our dashboard in our car or wherever we are at home. I was going to say the fridge, but maybe you don't go to the fridge that often. Maybe some of us do, but it should be there. Hashem is before you. That's not just the fridge, but God is everywhere. It goes on to quote again from Psalms, from Tehillim, and he says that, I shouldn't see over here, where he quotes from Tehillim. So it says, serve the eternal through fear and rejoice through trembling. And similarly in Tehillim it says, God whose grandeur is in the great council of the holy ones and whose awesomeness is over all who surround him. Again, so that's again just understanding just how great, how awesome Hashem is. It brings an interesting point over here. He says the angels, who we know are closer to Hashem, right? They inhabit the spiritual realms closer to Hashem. They find it easier to envisage the praise of his greatness. Consequently, his awe affects them to a greater extent than it affects human beings. Right? Makes sense, because they can, in a more tangible way, see Hashem in inverted commas, feel Hashem. So they have greater awe of Hashem, the angels. We on a lower level. Nevertheless, David HaMelech says he was accustomed to praising Hashem. He says, I will bow towards your holy Beit HaMikdash in awe of you. Again, he just continues. I'm just going to fast forward a bit. He just gives other scriptural citations over here for just understanding and having the awe of Hashem. Okay. He says that this fear, this yirah, and again, it's such a hard word to define, yirah, fear, because we're not saying serving Hashem out of fear because he's like this great God up there and he's got a dart. And we here below are like the dartboard, and he's just waiting to throw a dart, like God forbid, like a voodoo doll. And there's a voodoo doll, and Hashem's putting a pin in that voodoo doll, and something's going to happen to us. That's not what it's about. That we fear punishment. Of course, fear punishment is one of the elements, but it's a much lower form of the fear. We're talking about just the awe of Hashem. Hashem, I'm nothing without you. You're everything. And you've given me this opportunity. Everything that I'm doing is because of you. And it's that knowledge and that acknowledgement that we have to have. He says, now we're going to speak about something else. Up until this point, we've spoken about submissiveness. In other words, I'm the Eved, I'm the servant, Hashem, you the master, the greatest master, and in fact, the kindest master. Now he says we're going to speak about the concept of honor, of kavod. He says the sages of blessed memory have cautioned regarding the honor and esteem that must be accorded to a mitzvah. And they've said, he quotes here from the Gemara in Shabbos, this is my God. Okay, the verse comes from Davening, this is my God, and I will adorn him. It says, adorn yourself before him. Okay, it's a beautiful interpretation of that. So again, the verse in the Yesharim, this is my God, and I'm going to adorn him. How the rabbis interpret that is adorn yourself before him. Okay, Zekeli, this is my God. How are you going to interact with him? Adorn yourself. What does it mean, adorn yourself? With beautiful tzitzis, a beautiful tefillin, a beautiful Torah scroll, beautiful lulav. In other words, doing the mitzvahs in a beautiful way. That's how. It's not about adorning Hashem. Hashem doesn't need adornment. Right? Hashem isn't a mannequin that you're now dressing. You know, God forbid if you think about it like that. It's about adorning ourselves. Similarly, our rabbi said, one should expect up to 1/3 extra for the embellishment of a mitzvah. Sorry, one should expend. In other words, you can buy a little of an etrog, right? Maybe it's a bad example because they're really so expensive here. But let's say a normal set is 100 Rand and an extra Mahuda is 120 Rand. We should try buy the 120 Rand. And that applies to all mitzvot. Of course, we mustn't get ourselves into a situation where we become impoverished through it. Obviously not. We have to live through the mitzvah, not only physically, but spiritually and financially as well. But of course, try to do your mitzvahs in the most beautiful type of way. That's the idea, Zekeli, this is my God, and I'll adorn him, not him, but us. Okay, so he says something beautiful. He says, in this world, when we're looking for the mitzvah, please join. Dennis, good to see you. When we're looking for when we're buying that mitzvah artifact, that mitzvah object, yes, that's coming from our account, right? Our account's being debited, Stanley, for that. But in the world to come, so to speak, it's Hashem's eternal account that's going to be debited, and we're going to be credited with that. So he says like this, he says, the sages of blessed memory would say that merely performing a mitzvah, right, in a routine way is unsatisfactory. We should be able to do it with that embellishment, with that honor, right? We said before as well, never mind in terms of buying something nicer. You've got tefillin. Okay, maybe buy a nice tefillin bag to put it in. Don't put it in a checkers plastic bag. As an example, that would be an example of hidur mitzvah. You still got the tefillin, tick. You're still putting them on, great. But to put them in something nice. It says, furthermore, this wisdom was intended to negate the claims of a person who, desiring to make things easier for himself, might say honor applies only towards human beings, who are enticed by such trivia. So again, that's the way of the Yetzer Hara as well. To use an issue of kavod, and so the idea of kavod, honor, only applies to individuals, right? Pirkei Avot says, don't claim honor for yourself, right? If you chase off the honor, it's going to run away from you. How you treat honor. So also the same idea, tabriot. If you're going to give honor to all the other creatures out there, that's how you get honor. By honoring others is how you get honor. So your Yetzer Hara might tell you, what do you mean giving honor to a mitzvah? It isn't such a concept. Honor is something only that's given to a person. So he says, no, we shouldn't be entrapped into that way of thinking. We should know that honor also applies to mitzvah and Hashem. How do we honor Hashem? By doing mitzvahs and by doing the mitzvot in the gold standard way, in the best possible way. We know many times, it says here that Hashem is referred to, and I know we know that God has many, many names, but one of the names, he quotes from Tehillim, other places as well, is Kel HaKavod, the honorable God, not El HaKavod. So the honorable God means, what does it mean? It's our duty to honor him, right? God is honorable anyway. God has kavod anyway. But we have to make sure that we accord him the honor that's due to him. And by doing that, again, just summarizing as well, he's just making sure that we do the mitzvahs, the commandments, the precepts in the way that are in the greatest kavodic way, the most respectful way. Yeah, so again, it brings the concept over here that we have, as in the laws of sacrifices, we're not allowed to bring for Hashem an animal that has a mum, that has a blemish. Now, if the animal is blind, okay, now the animal's dead, it's going to be a sacrifice. Doesn't matter if it's blind. If you're going to give this blind animal to a king of flesh and blood, what he's going to turn around and say, I'm not taking this lamb carcass you're giving me. Of course, he's going to be happy with it. You're giving him a gift. What the animal's blind makes no difference. But no, you're bringing something before God, and that does make a difference. You want to give him the cover, you want to give him the honor, you want to make sure that the sacrifice you're bringing to him has no blemish whatsoever. If it can be seen, not be seen, if it's pertinent in death, doesn't make a difference. Okay, I just want to go on to something else. He also goes on to say a thing over here, that when it came to the water on the Simchas Beit HaShoeva, there was a whole ceremony and simcha that took place during the water drawing ceremony over Sukkot, that was actually filtered. It was filtered and it was neutralized from all possible poisons or snake venoms. Maybe they don't have to worry about Joburg water and all the contamination. Their water is probably purer than our water. But nevertheless, we're told, our rabbis tell us that water that was used for the drawing of the libations was filtered. Not because it was going to come to human consumption. Again, the concept of kavod or concept of harm coming to people, that wasn't the case. It was being used for the Beit HaMikdash, for the temple. Nevertheless, to honor the Beit HaMikdash, this water that was never going to be drunk had to be filtered. Understand what he's saying? So you have to give honor even to something that wasn't going to be used for the consumption of human beings. It was a consumption of the Beit HaMikdash, just like a sacrifice. The water libations were the same thing. They had to be purified. They had to be perfect. He says the same concept of, I'll say, outside of Cain and Hevel, right? Cain and Abel. Cain kills Hevel, Cain kills Abel. Why? Because Hevel's sacrifice was accepted before Hashem, right? And Cain's sacrifice wasn't accepted by Hashem. What is the difference in their sacrifices? You know it. So what was different? Hevel brought of his very best. Hevel brought of the very best of his produce, of his animals. Cain thought, yeah, okay, it's a thing. I need to bring a sacrifice to God. It's a nice thing. My brother's doing it. So let me see what I can find. Let me see what I can scratch around to bring as a sacrifice. And that's the reason why it wasn't, because it wasn't from the choicest of things. Hevel's was, Cain's wasn't. Hevel's found favor in God's eyes. Cain's didn't. And again, that's a similar concept over there. He says as well, well, maybe just a few more, that in many instances, the rabbis of blessed memory have warned us against the denigration of mitzvahs. And he gives an example. So the Gemara in Megillah says, whoever holds a Torah scroll while it is uncovered will be buried naked. Otherwise, it doesn't literally mean naked, but it's going to mean that he's bereft of a mitzvot. Because of the denigration of a mitzvah, the procedure for bringing the bikurim, so we know that the first fruits were brought, can enlighten us regarding the meaning of the embellishment of mitzvahs. So here what he's giving us is a lot of examples, many examples of where we find the concept of hidur mitzvah, doing the mitzvah in a beautiful way, embellishing it. And why? It says, the ox walks before them, its horns gilded in gold, an olive wreath on its head. The wealthy bring their bikurim in baskets gilded in gold, and the poor in wicker baskets. So again, we find that same concept as well. Even the animals, right, which came forward to bring the bikurim, to bring the first fruits to the temple, the animals themselves were adorned in gold. The rich people, if they had the extra means, made their baskets extra beautiful. And the poor people at least made sure that they had the nice wicker baskets. Again, the concept of hidur, of bring something over here. Funny thing, if I can say, from Gemara Shabbos, that Rava was one of the Amoraim of the Gemara, one of the sages of the Gemara. It says that Rava put on expensive socks before praying, saying, prepare yourself before your God. Again, it comes to the concept of as well, how we come dressed to shul, how much more so on Shabbos. That's a whole different sukkah, that's a whole other Dvar Torah or Drosha to give it another occasion, how people come dressed to shul. Let's just do one more thing. The concept of Esav and Yaakov, right? We know that Yitzchak had a tremendous love for Esav. And the concept is why? We know there was a trickery, we know Yaakov really was going to be the spiritual heir, really was at that time the perfect one, the Gutinka. But what we learn now, what our rabbis teach us, is that when Esav served his father, he served his father in the best clothes. He served his father adorned perfectly, nicely. Again, that concept of how we come before Hashem, how we come. And this is how you're doing your father, how you're serving for Avishav Hashemayim, our Father in heaven. And again, just maybe end off with that concept and that beautiful one, just to summarize it. This is my God. I'm going to glorify him. I'm going to adorn him. It's not for him. Hashem is glorified enough. Hashem is adorned, so to speak, enough. What does it mean? Zekeli. This is God. How are you going to serve God? By you being adorned, by you making sure that you've got everything perfect. First of all, you look the part, you're dressed appropriately, but also you're adorned. You've got to make sure that you've got the vestiges, you've got the clothing of mitzvot, and that's how you're coming before Hashem. So the glorifying or the adorning is not so much speaking to God, but speaking to you, how you come before Hashem. Okay, let's end there.